we've got a couple of minutes to just have a little soft start into the session and get us thinking about social pedagogy in slightly more creative ways. So what I'd like to invite you to do is, whilst we wait for a few more others to join us, Zoom has this really cool annotate function. So at the top of your screen, you should see something that says you're viewing Gabriel Eichsteller's stream. And next to it, there should be something that says view options. And as part of that, there should be a function saying annotate. If you're on an iPad or a smaller mobile device, there might be a little pen icon somewhere as part of your sort of navigation bar. If you're able to find it, then you can start drawing in the tree. If you're unable to find it, then you can just watch others and don't worry too much. This is entirely for our own entertainment and a slightly creative exercise of like group coloring, basically, to just see if we can populate this tree with a few creative contributions. Do your own squiggles, add some hearts, add some stars, whatever you want. Add a little sun or some more birds or anything you like, really. And they'll also tell you how to mess up with our slides later on. If you are getting bored or are feeling particularly creative, then you can always improve our slides later on as well. So whilst everybody else is joining us, yeah, I'd just like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. We're really delighted to be running this session. I'll be saying a little bit more about that in a minute. And also welcome my co-presenters today. The other thing I'd like to invite you to do is to just use the chat as well at any point to ask any questions or comment or anything. And also importantly, to just introduce yourself a little bit in the chat. So maybe just let us know where you're joining us from, which organization you're part of, or what your role within that organization is. Okay, that would really help in making sure that we can choose examples that might particularly resonate with you, or that we at least make sure that this presentation or everything that we're saying kind of also speaks to you in one way or another. So this is going pretty well here. I'm loving all the visuals, all the creative contributions. And I think on some level, it hopefully gives us this idea of like we're creating this tree collectively. And that's a metaphor that I'm gonna go a bit more into detail about in a moment. So whilst some of you are still coloring away there, I'll just introduce ourselves, say a few words about the session today and our session aims, and then we'll talk a little bit more about social pedagogy. So my name is Gabriel Eichsteller. I'm co-director and learning facilitator with Empra Social Pedagogy. We're an international not-for-profit training consultancy organization, and have been supporting a whole range of different organizations in social care and social work, predominantly in the UK, and in their exploration of how does social pedagogy enable us to be more relationship-centered in our practice, how does it enable our teams to apply those same principles to how we work with each other, and how can we affect systems change so that we're better able to provide learning opportunities, make meaningful changes, achieve meaningful outcomes for the people we support. I am co-editor of the International Journal of Social Pedagogy as well, which is an open access journal with lots of insights into what does this look like in different countries, what does this look like in practice, how does it theoretically fit. We've just are in the process of publishing a special issue on social pedagogy in schools, which explores some of those aspects about how could this relate within the school context. and so on and so forth. And more recently, I have also become an associate lecturer with SETU. So I'll pass you over to Lillian Byrne to introduce herself on that note.
Sorry, I just was trying to find my unmute button. I'm Lillian Byrne. I work with SETU and I have since 2005. I suppose I am a social care worker by training. I trained in the 80s, and maybe some of you would have heard that at the start of the session, that a lot of our work that we did was looking at the child and the child in its context, whether that was within its family, within the community, or within the system that the care intervention that that child needed was situated. So that's kind of where I was coming from, because I suppose what I have seen over the last number of years is the social care workers that are being graduated, they need to be able to work within a very dynamic I suppose a very dynamic atmosphere out there. And I think social pedagogy could be a way to capture that and to give them the tools. So myself and Gabriel were collaborating on another project, which we'll tell you about later on. And we came up with this. So I'm delighted to be here and to kind of contribute what I can. So I'll pass you back to Gabriel.
Thanks, Lillian. And we'll also now hear from Derek Byrne, who is the CEO of Compass Child Family Services. Derek, over to you for some short introductions.
Thanks, Gabriel. No relation to Lillian Byrne, just to clarify. Yeah, I'm CEO of Compass just over 2 years now. Been working with Compass and in this social pedagogy model of care for the last 9.5 years. Prior to that, I worked in special care, where I would have met Toby Haslam-Hopwood, who will introduce himself shortly. My background was in a sporting background, recreation, fitness. I did a Bachelor of Science in Health and Fitness. And more recently, I returned to Trinity College and did a Master's in Social Policy. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Derek. Toby and Claire, over to you.
Hi, I am Claire Warren. I'm the operations manager for the Galtee Clinic. So social care is my background as well. I think I did my final 4th year degree in like 2001 or something like that. And I spent about 12 years in Glownaling Special Care Unit in Cork. And then I met Toby and we essentially then opened up the Galtee Clinic 11 years ago now. So I have been there ever since. So yeah, traditionally or originally a social care worker and now, you know, trying to be a pedagogue. So that's basically me.
Having met both Claire and Derek in special care, obviously special care has been very good for me. If it's not good for other people, it's been good for me. My name is Toby. I'm a psychologist by training. I did my training in the States and then came here about 15 years ago, and I've been working since then in residential childcare, initially in the Midwest, around Limerick, Clare, Tipperary, where I met Derek in special care. Yeah, similarly to Claire, we set up the Galtee Clinic in you know, whatever, 11 years ago, and based on social pedagogy principles, and we can talk about that as we go through today.
Perfect. Thanks very much. And you'll be hearing more about social pedagogy in practice at Compass and the Galtee Clinic as we go through the session. So hopefully that will kind of resonate with many of you. So a warm welcome for all of those of you who've just joined us whilst we were doing the introductions, and we're gonna be basically building on this beautiful social pedagogy tree there that we have been co-designing here in the background. I'm gonna just move us on then, if I can, and that means I will need to delete all those beautiful contributions there, but I did take a screenshot as well, so none of these are lost. Right, so today's session is very much about giving you a flavor of what the social pedagogy look and feel like, and how can it support relationship-centered practice within social care, although it's not limited just to social care. And hopefully we will give you a bit of flavor of how it can help you as a perspective for what you're already doing. It's really important to emphasize that this isn't about saying, like, forget everything that you've done before, here's a new thing, it'll solve all your problems. It's quite the opposite. For us, it's always important that we build on what people are already doing. And in our experience, social pedagogy offers a perspective that enables people to validate what they're doing, to feel more confident in what they're doing, to recognize the amazing contribution they make to other people's lives on a day-to-day basis that often goes unnoticed or unrecognized, and to be able to articulate that with a fresh set of words, some fresh ideas, and hopefully kind of feel like this is even, you know, this is sharpening our focus on what really matters, which is building meaningful relationships that facilitate well-being, learning, and social inclusion. So with that said, I'll give a very, very brief initial definition of what social pedagogy is, just because I know some people kind of need to know that at the very beginning. So what is this? What are we talking about here? So I would argue that social pedagogy offers an integrative and coherent perspective on supporting learning, well-being, and social inclusion. And we do that in social pedagogy both through relationship-centered practice, so by putting relationships at the heart, and through structural efforts to address social inequality and promote social change. So it's not just what we do in practice with the people we support, but it's also about how do we affect the systems so that we're achieving greater equality, that we're helping people find meaningful belonging within their community, whatever their community might be, and whatever meaningful belonging might look like for different people. Okay, social pedagogy has been in some countries has been around for a very, very long time, and so we often kind of liken it a bit to a tree, in that trees, you know, grow in slightly different ways depending on what the soil conditions are and where they're based. And so for us, it's very much about co-constructing or creating the conditions in which social pedagogy can thrive within an Irish context. And so that's why, in a metaphorical sense, this idea of co-coloring in the tree, co-designing the tree is one that kind of applies to how we might develop social pedagogy in Ireland. And obviously, you know, we've got some of the pioneers here today who've already done lots of that over the last 12 to 15 years or so. So when I talk about a tree, you might say, like, so what's part of the roots? And one of the key things around the tree is very much that at the roots of it, it is about connecting a number of theoretical perspectives from a range of different disciplines that might include education, sociology, psychology, philosophy, and many more. And that basically has the purpose that through those theoretical insights, we're able to see both the individual and understand the individual, as well as see the wider context. So the society they live in, the groups they interact in, the environment that they are shaped by and are shaping, okay? So that's why we need a whole range of interdisciplinary insights and conceptual understandings that enable us to do that. The other thing that's important as part of the roots is a strong ethical foundation. So we often talk about social pedagogy as an ethical, coherent ethical framework that recognizes that people and communities are inherently rich and resourceful, that people have unlimited potential. And so that frames our interaction with people and community. and recognizes that actually it's to everybody's benefit when we see diversity as something that enriches us as communities, when we make sure, therefore, that every person feels included and is enabled to develop their potential, because that adds to that collective richness. Okay. And alongside that, there's also an understanding of human rights as one of the foundations, as one of the roots. And that gives that security that each individual is treated with unconditional regard of their human dignity, irrespective of who they are, what they look like, or what they believe in, or what they've done. And so that requires us to be really strong advocates and to meaningfully involve both individuals and communities in promoting social justice and furthering social change. Okay, so those are essentially the roots. And you can find social pedagogy, those trees, in slightly different constellations in many different European countries. But those roots are always very similar in that respect. Now, how we bring these foundations to life is what we refer to as Haltung, which is the only German term we're going to introduce you to today, I hope. Haltung is basically about authenticity. It's about the congruence between our values and our interactions. So it describes the extent to which we bring what we believe into the interactions with the people around us. That is Haltung, basically. And so it is about living those values, those ethics, that understanding of theory and human rights. And when we do that, we focus on a couple of different things. We focus on well-being and happiness. We focus on holistic learning. We focus on relationships, and we focus on empowerment. And I'll say a fair bit more about that when we come to the next model. But before we do that, I thought I'd give you a little break, stop the screen share for now so that we can all see each other, and ask you one question, which is, what are you curious about today, this morning? What's one thing that you're curious about? I'm gonna just introduce you to the first model, really, of social pedagogy. I'd already mentioned some of those elements when we were talking about the social pedagogy tree, and this idea that actually what social pedagogy looks like in different countries really depends on the kind of society that it's grown, what it's grown out of. So in Germany, it has a very long-standing tradition. It dates back to the 1840s, dates back to, you know, the Industrial Revolution and issues around social inequality that led to some proponents suggesting that what was needed was a more social, educative way of addressing social inequalities and the shocking poverty at that time. In other countries, it has only been more recently been introduced. In some countries, it's professional qualification. In other countries, it's more used as a perspective on, say, social education or social care or social work. So what exactly it looks like always depends a little bit on which country you're talking about. But I think what really kind of cuts across all of that is this idea that people are inherently rich, and how we normally frame that is through the diamond model, is through this idea that basically every person has this diamond within them, that our underlying view of the nature of human beings is very much focused on what makes people unique, what makes people resourceful, rich in potential and possibilities, and why we therefore need to treat people with human dignity and uphold their human rights. All of that are lots of big words potentially that are quite easy to gloss over sometimes, that you know, easily roll off the tongue to say every person is unique or every person is resourceful. But actually, what do we actually mean when we talk about that? What does that look like in practice? To give you an example, I'm gonna just share one little practice situation from a Danish children's home. So in Denmark, particularly in children's homes, people tend to work there when they are highly qualified and highly experienced. So at the peak of their careers as a social pedagogue, the sector kind of feels like they're ready to work in a children's home with the most disadvantaged children, young people. And in this particular children's home, they were about to celebrate the birthday of one of the boys that lived there. And suddenly his mom showed up at the door. She wanted to join the birthday party. She hadn't told the home about that. And she completely showed up out of the blue, and she had clearly had a few drinks. Okay. So in that situation, it would have been very easy to kind of just say like, oh, sorry, we really can't have you here. This is really no state to show up. You're too drunk. You're going to ruin the birthday party of your boy. We've got this covered. Just go away. You didn't talk to us before that. You didn't agree this with the social worker. We really can't have you here. Just leave it to us. We'll make sure that the boy has a nice birthday party, right? So there would have been a lot of this kind of argumentation that they could have used to just send her away. What they did was the exact opposite. They invited her in. They saw the fact that she had remembered her son's birthday party and that she'd made an effort to show up. They saw that as a sign of love, and they wanted to support that. They understood that this was probably a really shameful, really traumatic experience, really emotional experience for her that just meant that she couldn't face it sober. So they took her into the kitchen. They had a long conversation with her. They gave her a strong coffee. And when she was ready to join her son's birthday party, she was welcome in. And I think it very much shows this idea of not just looking for the diamond in the people we support, i.e., for instance, those children in the children's home, but actually extending that to every human being that we come across, and every human being that might have an important role to play within the lives of the people we support. Okay, so they recognized that her relationship with her son was something that they needed to strengthen, that they needed to support, and that they needed to give her an opportunity to just be a different person, like a better mom in that respect. And to know what that meant, and to know that they were actually there to support her in that, on that journey as well. So that links us very much to this idea that we can create the conditions in which we bring out the best in people, in which we allow people to flourish, to perhaps be more than they've been in the past. And that's incredibly powerful. It doesn't mean, as I think this example shows, that we just accept people's behavior, but that we're actually looking beyond the behavior that we're faced with, that we're looking for what's beneath that. Where can we actually recognize that diamond within, and what can we do to create the conditions in which that diamond comes out, in which that diamond has more of a chance to sparkle. So with that being said, I'll share another little example, because I think very often this kind of idea of there's a diamond in every person really resonates with people, particularly when you're supporting people who haven't experienced themselves as rich and resourceful, who've been told perhaps throughout their lives that they're not really worth much, that they're not really good at achieving anything in school or elsewhere in life, that who have been told that they're a failure, that they're basically characterized by the sum of their needs, by the sum of their deficits. So it's really important that we kind of try and turn this around to give people a greater sense of hope and what they can become, who they can be. And so I think the diamond model very often speaks to people. And we had one foster carer on a course just recently who really loved the diamond model and was talking about his foster son and his own kids, and came up with this activity where they did some sort of mud kitchen type thing. So he had a big lump of mud, and within that he'd put little gemstones. And as they were kind of doing that activity and just kind of playing with the mud, they all found these little gemstones. And as part of that, they were then talking about how those diamonds are often hidden within the mud, just as kind of our own inner richness is often hidden within everything else that people can see. And it's about recognizing that this diamond is still within each of us. And so they had a really lovely conversation, and both his kids and the foster son kind of felt really valued and kind of took that to heart, that there is this diamond within them. And not everybody might be able to see that all the time, but actually it was a bit of a visual reminder that it's still there, and that it's worth looking for it, and that we can do things to kind of bring that out to the front, right? So the diamond model also kind of functions as a way for us to articulate what we aim to achieve with social pedagogy. So the first thing is well-being and happiness is very much connected to this idea that everything we do should ultimately support people's well-being, their ability to thrive, to flourish, and their happiness. We see that in slightly nuanced ways, in that we often talk about well-being as the kind of long-term overarching sense of spiritual, emotional, social, physical, and mental well-being. And the happiness about being more in the moment, in the here and now, and what we can do in the here and now to feel happy, to feel that sense of joy. And of course, both are important. Both the here and now needs to be a focus of our practice, and what we can do to create happy moments, to spark joy, but also to ensure that the happiness in the here and now supports our overarching well-being in the long term. So, you know, I love ice cream, and it's a great time of the year to eat lots of ice cream, and that would make me incredibly happy on a daily basis, but it wouldn't completely support my well-being in the long term, right? So there's sometimes also something about what can we do to make sure that my happiness doesn't negatively affect my well-being as well. So helping people understand those kinds of connections is really important. And of course, there's also something about happiness and well-being look very different for different people. So what makes me happy will be different things that might make Derek happy, or might make Denise happy, and so on and so forth. So we always need to get to know the person as well in order to really understand what can we do to meaningfully support their sense of well-being and happiness. On kind of on the opposite side, reflecting that is this idea of holistic learning. So I've already talked a bit about social pedagogy being inherently concerned with what we can do to support learning, to enable people to thrive. And so we're trying to inject a learning focus into the everyday practice. And that could be about, you know, say, those foster kids and family kind of learning about what the diamonds within them are, or learning about, you know, the fact that there is that inner richness in something that looks perhaps like it's just a lump of mud. It could be about, you know, that boy in the Danish children's home learning that actually his mom can be there to look after him and to have a great time with him. And learning that she genuinely cares about him, even if she might struggle to express that at all times. So it's those kinds of everyday learning things that are really important to us in social pedagogy. And when we talk about this in holistic terms, it means that we're focused on learning with head, heart, and hands, basically, that we're looking for what needs to happen so that people can kind of be in a mental learning space. So what can we do to support a learning mindset, for instance, but also what's the kind of values-based moral learning opportunities that we have? What can we help people with to support their ethical understanding of the world and who they are within the world, and all those things. And of course, there's also something about the practical in terms of how can we help people learn practical skills as well. So all of that is part of what we're trying to achieve in social care practice, really. To make that possible, we have two things. So one is relationships, and by building meaningful and authentic relationships, we're better able to support people's well-being and happiness, and to create the kind of situations where they can actually learn, where learning starts from where the other person is at, and where learning goes at their pace. So we need to build real meaningful relationships. But also we need to recognize that relationships are an aim in themselves. So building relationships isn't a means to an end, it's an end in itself. It gives us that opportunity to really show recognition and to really show to the other person that we see that diamond within them, that we value them because they're a human being, and that's not conditional on whether they follow our instructions or do what we want them to do. It's only conditional on the fact that they are a human being, okay? And so it also gives us an opportunity to kind of help people understand, what does a trusting, meaningful, authentic relationship look like? What does it feel like when we're in those kinds of relationships? And many more things, really. As the example from the Danish Children's Home suggests, it's also about both what we can do to build relationships with the people we support, but also what we can do to enable them to build more meaningful relationships with the people that are important in their lives. So that's why really everything that we do is about relationships and has to do with relationships. That's why we talk about relationship-centered practice, because the relationships are very much at the heart. The other part within that context is, of course, that the relationships part is about interdependence, and recognizing that as human beings, we're interdependent, we're interrelated, interconnected. And also we need to support independence at the same time. We need to help people get a greater sense of empowerment, of feeling like they're in control of their lives and the decisions that affect them. And that they're able to, express their voices, express their views, and that other people are there to actually hear those voices and act upon them, okay? And finally, at the heart of all of this is this idea of positive experiences, that what we do in our practice is to try and give people a more positive experience of their own well-being and happiness, that sense of, whilst I'm in that children's home, or whilst I'm in that foster placement, or whilst I'm in that supported service, whatever it might be, that I'm starting to feel happier about my life. I'm starting to get a better understanding of how I can improve my own well-being. I'm starting to learn new things and to feel like I'm growing as a person, starting to feel like I'm building really meaningful relationships, that I'm improving my relationships with the people around me who are important to me, and that I'm starting to feel more in control of my life, that I feel like I have a future and I can take ownership for how to get there. So all of these things then become really important and are why we focus on this idea of positive experiences. What can we do in the here and now to give people a more positive experience of who they are, and what opportunities they really have in life. So Toby, I wonder if I can just invite you in, because I believe you have a good example of the diamond model.
Yeah, so as we said, we started Galtee in 2011, and it came about because I was working in Couva House, and Jörg Schluter was a deputy manager there, and he was, a social pedagogue by training, and he used to bang on to me that things work better in Germany. Having grown up in England in the 80s, I was used to hearing that things work better in Germany than they do in England because our trains never ran on time and all the rest of it. So I largely ignored him. And then he took me off to Cologne and showed me children's homes over there, and I left, very impressed, and it sort of led to your setting up Compass and myself to set up Galtee Clinic, sort of as sister organizations really in many ways. But we started and didn't have any kids to begin with, because we were really outside of the box in terms of how we're running our service, and nobody wanted to send us any kids. And we employed this couple who are social pedagogues from Germany, and we spent the first 6 months without any children, trying to get from them an understanding of social pedagogy and how they were going to work with the kids. It was different from us. And all I got back was, it depends, it depends, it depends, for any question I would ask. And it drove me absolutely bananas. And I began to suspect that the two of them were quite mad. And then we got our first kid into the Galtee clinic, and he was a child that had a very bad reputation of being very violent and very challenging. And he came to us, and we were delighted because we were about to go broke from running out of money from employing all these people. And I went off to work in Couva House and came back, and there was this boy sitting with my then wife in my kitchen table with his feet up on the table in my chair, going, look, essentially you've got a choice. You can either take me to Clonmel now, or I'm going to smash up your kitchen and then I'll take you to Clonmel. And I walk into this sort of thing, and I was like, Christ, I don't know what I'm going to do. And my wife's looking at me going, this isn't what I expected, in terms of looking after children. We thought it was a great plan. And then in walked Alexander, who was our German pedagogue, and really all I'd got out of him for the last 6 months was, it depends. And I was extremely nervous that this was going to get even worse if he started saying it depends to this child. And Alexander, and I'm going to use an accent just to sort of exemplified that it was a whole foreign way of working to me, although my accent's not meant to be German, so I apologize. It's meant to be German, but it's really bad.
Pretty Russian.
It's pretty Russian. So Alexander said to this boy, okay, so you want to smash the house up. Okay, no problem. Okay, we can do that in a minute. But first of all, I'd like to understand a little bit about you. What do you want to do when you grow up? And the boy replied, I want to be a drug dealer. And Alexander went, okay, drug dealer. Okay, that's interesting. You want to be a drug dealer because I want to make loads of money. Great. Okay. So you want to be a good drug dealer. Okay, yeah, I see no problem with that. We help you be a drug dealer. And I'm sitting there thinking, Christ, I'm going to get fired from my job, and the Galtee clinic's going to get shut down. We start teaching kids how to be drug dealers. But I said, let it go. And Alexander said, so, okay, you want to be a good drug dealer. I help you. So, what skills are drug dealers? Okay, you need to be able to drive a getaway car. You need to be able to count money, so maths. Maybe you need to learn how to build coffins because you need to bury people. And the kid's sort of eyes sort of lit up and said, coffins? Yeah, I'd like to build coffins. Okay, you're interested in coffins. Okay. So tomorrow we learn to build coffins, and we built coffins. And he left, and the kid forgot about going to Clonmel and smashing our house up, and essentially went up the house and had a very quiet evening, and came down the next morning ready to build coffins. And they spent the next 6 months together working in the yard, not building coffins, but building flower boxes, which the kid then sold in the local village and made them out of wood. And, and the kid was responsible for measuring them, buying the wood, taking them down to the village, selling them. And then from that, somebody asked him to build a horse trough, and he built a trough for a horse out of wood, which then got him interested into horses. And he then went off and learnt how to become a jockey. And that was essentially his stay with us for the 2 years. He ended up, going off to jockey school. And, for me, this captured the diamond model. This pedagogue came in, and instead of seeing a thug that was there wanting to smash my house up, what he saw was a child who had dreams and aspirations and hopes and didn't really have any way to express those. And he, elicited from him that, wanted to be a drug dealer, but again, took him from where he was at and built a relationship around teaching him how to be a good drug dealer. But, created loads of positive experiences about them working together, building. The holistic learning came in terms of all the skills that he learned about buying stuff, working with tradespeople, selling. And the kid was really happy from pretty much from day dot, and felt empowered to go on to find other things that he was interested in. And really, I was left gobsmacked, obviously, that I'd gone from having potentially a fight with a kid in my kitchen, which is not what I wanted to have happen, to him having the most amazing experience with us. And that's what really was an introduction, A, to the diamond model, and B, to really a very much sort of relationship-based approach to empowering, teaching, and giving kids, a sense of happiness and enjoyment. So for me, that was the diamond model in practice, Gabriel.
Thanks. That's a cracking example. I love it. It is so rich, and I think it very much shows what can happen when we accept that this is the starting point that people are at, and we need to pick them up wherever they're at, and take their hopes and dreams seriously to an extent, and then trust that process, that actually through those relationships, through those experiences, they will see other ways in which they can be in the world, and what skills they have, and how they can use those in a much more socially constructive way than being a drug dealer. But yeah, I've heard slightly similar stories about when you dig down into those kinds of ideas. It's about like, how can I make money? How can I make sure that I stay out late and don't have to get up too early in the morning, or those kinds of things. And once you kind of better understand like what's the motivation behind, it gives us an opportunity to actually connect to the human being, to not just go like, oh, you shouldn't be a drug dealer, but to actually see like, well, I can understand this need to make money, to be someone that other people might respect, and all of that. Let's find a different way in which that would be possible as well. And it's a great example. Fantastic story. So
yeah, and I have to say, as a psychologist, I could have imagined myself getting into a whole moral discussion with him about how being a drug dealer is a really crap occupation and comes with all sorts of costs and risks, and and it would have just been a nightmare. I would have got absolutely nowhere. And it was fascinating to watch this man, just absolutely accept him where he was at, and over the course of a few weeks and then into months, steer him, or allow the child to steer himself really into a more constructive and positive direction where essentially the risks were fewer. I don't know if being a jockey if the risks are fewer, but he essentially got an awful lot of satisfaction out of doing something different. So it was lovely really to see and be part of.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And yeah, so I hopefully this gives you a bit of a flavor of like what the diamond model might look like, and in a range of different practice contexts. And if you want any particular sort of other examples, we can feed those in as well. So particularly if you work with, I think there were a few of you who work with people with disabilities. Again, I think this is something that very much kind of hopefully resonates with you as well, this idea that we often see people with disabilities and focus on their needs, and actually this gives us an opportunity to really kind of change that paradigm and to focus on the diamond within them and on creating the conditions in which that can come to the fore for them and other people around them to see. There's one other example that I always love sharing, and it kind of just shows the power of language within that as well. So this happened during the first lockdown, actually, in Oxfordshire, I think, where most children and people were required, schools were shut except unless you were on the vulnerable children's list, in which case schools were open to you and there were special supports in place. And apparently a school nurse had been going on a socially distanced walk with a child that she was supporting to check up on him. And this boy talked to her about how delighted he was that he got special treatment, and that all of this was because he was on the valuable children's list, right? So he clearly misunderstood the vulnerable children's list to be the valuable children's list. And so the school nurse shared this on Twitter, and the director for children's social care in Lancashire picked up on that and decided that as a local authority, they would replace their terminology of vulnerable children with valuable children, because that better reflected that these children, young people, are all the more valuable to us because of, you know, whatever is happening in their lives, and that this really reflected the ethos that she wanted her teams to have. So again, there's something about you know, great things can happen when we just find ways to focus a bit more on that diamond within people. Okay, so what I'd like to do at this point then is
sorry, Gerby, can I just hop in there a second? Yeah. It's just when both of you were talking, in particular Toby, you know, where he was saying about, you know, that kind of embodied stress that he had when his worker was going to take a space, that like, what's he going to do, etc. But actually, I would probably think that the worker wasn't feeling the same amount of anxiety, because they had this kind of, you know, broad frame about, this is all of the things that I can do and say to have this young person feel valued. And therefore, actually, while we might have seen it, or, you know, Toby might have seen it as a really high risk situation, that the worker themselves was, no, I've got this because I know where this is going. So for me, it's just when we share the values and principles of how we intervene, then we re-see what risk is, and we kind of understand that there is going to be an outcome of better for the young person, and we trust our colleague to be able to move in that way. Toby, I see. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I just want to make a slight adjustment to what you've said, because I think what you're saying is really valuable. But actually, he didn't feel anxious. You're absolutely right. And I don't think he knew where it was going.
Okay.
But I think he trusted the process, and he trusted in his experience and the learning that he's had, that if I make enough space for this child to feel value, it's going to come good. Yeah. And I think it was just that principle. And, you know, and it was that opened it up. And that, as a consequence, he felt no anxiety, because he's like, I'm just going to create the opportunity, and the opportunity will go wherever it goes, but I trust it will end up somewhere.
Yeah, and I think, Toby, you're after articulating where I was kind of thinking about. He knew where it was going. He didn't have a definite outcome, but where it was going was, I'm listening to this person, I'm valuing them. And in many ways, I suppose there is, you know, I don't know, many of you might know Noel Howard, big social care pioneer in Ireland. And like, he always talks about, we know our own blood, our own family really, really well, and we will go with them in places that we don't have a set outcome. And if we could bring that quality, like to know our service users as well as our families, and trust them to know where they want to go. So yeah, you probably articulated what was in my head. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think then the risk part is something that's constantly part of that process as we build that relationship and as we kind of go on that journey together. So it's not something that I do at the very beginning and then it's done. It's something that is just constantly part of that. And as the relationship evolves, I get to know much more about what the risks are, and lots of those initial risks will just fall by the wayside. And if they don't, then that will inform what I do. But ultimately, it needs to start with an understanding that actually, in order to meaningfully manage any of those risks, we can only build a relationship and explore this together.
Yep. Sorry for interrupting there, Gabriel.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, just in relation to what you're mentioning about risk there, I think is really kind of, you know, pertinent as well, because that same pedagogue on the very first day with that child, you know, he arrived on the first evening, the kid, at about 6 o'clock. And we were all like super anxious about how it was going to go. And, you know, he was our first kid. And, you know, that evening, it was about 11 o'clock, and there was, you know, the kid and the the two pedagogues, and I'd spent the whole day running around with my social care head trying to put in risk assessments and safety plans and IAMPs and all of these things. And the pedagogue was saying to me, but how can you create any of these things? We don't even know the child. And I was like, yeah, I know, but we just have to have them in place. And so we had all this really super anxious day. And then that night, you know, the pedagogue said, okay, well, look, you know, it's kind of, you know, coming close to bedtime. And, you know, the kid threw his legs up on the table and looked at them in this really challenging way and was like, I'm not going to fucking bed. And they were like sitting there going, right. And they said, okay, well, look, we're going to go to bed. And sure, look, you might just turn off the lights and lock the door, you know, when you're ready. And sure, look, we'll see you in the morning. And, you know, they completely removed, you know, the struggle, and they created, you know, obviously part of this shared living space of actually, we're here together. We're not, you know, going to tell you what to do. And, you know, they went off to bed and they were in their bed texting me going, fuck. But actually, you know, the kid was left in the sitting room looking around going, where's the fight? Where's the challenge? Why aren't they giving me this big, you know, struggle around this? And 20 minutes later, you know, he turned off the light and they heard him, you know, going upstairs to bed. And I think that very first evening for me it always sticks out in my head, you know, along obviously with your story, of course. But actually that very first evening set the tone for everything that followed. Because this kid had a totally and utterly different experience on his first evening that he would have had, I'm going to say, in any other residential centre. And actually that first evening, you know, set us up for everything that followed. And I learned so much after hearing It Depends for 6 months with no kids. I saw it in practice then, and actually it was very powerful.
Great. And I think it shows this kind of potential to just kind of bring this idea of the diamond model into every single sort of little interaction, and that those very small interactions kind of very much set that tone. So yeah, perfect. Thanks for sharing that. Derek, I wonder if I can just bring you in there as well, because I know that at Compass, you guys have been using the diamond model as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as you were speaking there, I was wondering what would be helpful for people. And I might just give a practical example of something that we do in Compass that may happen in other children's residential centres, but we would see it as a distinct feature in Compass. And that's this correlation, I think, between relationships and autonomy. And that's managers are not present in the house. So it's a key feature. We've managers and deputy managers for children residential centres as required, but they work in an office location away from the home. So what this really allows is for our pedagogues to really be themselves, you know, to be empowered to make decisions themselves. Like that example that Toby just gave, without looking for guidance, direction, looking to a parent figure almost, you know, to lead or guide their decision making. They are really empowered to make those decisions in the moment with the child. So it's something, I think, for real authenticity in the relationship. I think it has been a really core feature that has worked well for Compass. What does this do? My own example, I worked within a special care setting, granted, but I wasn't able to set my own potential free. I felt really restricted in my practice and in how I could engage with a young person. And that's what I suppose drew me to Compass and drew me to social pedagogy, is that I could actually practice freely. I had the autonomy to work within the child, within a framework, granted, but really how I wanted to. There was real processes in terms of reflecting on how I was working with that young person. And then to build on that, everything wasn't about the child. I think that's a real distinct feature. What we acknowledged was that people working with young people need to be well cared for. They need to be confident, they need to be empowered, and by starting with the adults and by role modeling our relationship ourselves with each other, managers, CEO, the adults, role modeling how we treat each other, seeing the intrinsic value in each other, being honest and open with each other, challenging each other. That if we work really hard at that as pedagogues, then that in turn would role model onto the relationships with the kids. So I think it is a distinct feature in Irish residential care. I think it's becoming even more and more challenging now. The national standards for children's residential centres and the staffing requirements that are in place really don't then tend to that way of working. They really want strong leadership, management and governance. And it's something that we are resisting and fighting against all the time. We really want to create a natural home setting that takes the office environment out of the home, that is a homely language that isn't institutionalized, and that people can have real and meaningful conversations and relationships without always looking over their shoulder and feel they're being kind of judged or monitored in some level. So I think that has worked really, really well for us. And when we speak to the children in our homes, when we speak to the adults in our homes, even you'll get a sense of the language I'm using here, the children, the adults, it's not staff, young people, service users, etc. They really get a sense of that they don't know who I am, or they don't really have direct relationships with the managers. Really, it's the carers that they work with, they live with on a daily basis, that they have the relationships with, and they're the people that they come and learn to trust and value, and rather than the people in authority figures, so to speak. So yeah, that's just one part of the diamond model that I wanted to relate in terms of empowerment and relationships and how we try to foster that within Compass.
Thanks, Derek. That's really insightful, and it also kind of alludes to that bit about how do we apply this as an organization to how we work with each other, as well as how we engage with the statutory requirements and the wider sector.
Gabriel, sorry,
yeah.
Gabriel, can I just pick up on something that Derek was saying, and I was just wondering what participants' view of this would be. You made the decision about moving the office and the management off-site. So, I assume then that, the feel of the house where the young people or resident feels more like a home rather than the office block in one part of it. I'm just wondering, how does that resonate with any of the practitioners that's on the session? What do you think about that as a strategy or a structure? Does it feel scary? Would it happen?
I love it. Well, I think it's a great idea.
Okay, yeah.
Now it presents certain challenges. Now I'm speaking not as a lecturer here, but 20 years of experience in social care. I think the most important thing for a manager, team leader to be off-site would be that they focus on the professional supervision side of things, of the staff, of the pedagogues in this case, that are the practitioners on site, that they make sure that a lot of time, effort, energy, focus is on providing good, solid professional supervision, so the staff member has that regular kind of safe, supported space for development and for figuring out stuff. I think I would like the idea. I've never done it. When I've been a service manager or team leader, I've often had an office in a residential service, and I've never really liked even that, the fact that there's an office in a residential service.
Yeah. That's interesting, John, because I would have been the same. Like, the office would have been in the service. Helen, your mic is on, so I assume you want to jump in.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept to have the office off-site, but I hear Derek's fighting with the system basically to hold on to his own individual workings. And boy, have I had many a row with the inspectors. I I think it will nearly be next to impossible for us to institute that.
Okay.
Now. But I'm a manager, and I have a very clear open door policy. So my office, you know, if you look into my office, you see 2 armchairs and you see the incense, you see the plants, and my desk is kind of hidden behind the door. And the kids will walk in and they'll often just sit in the office with me. And I might still have to continue working. I could be doing something on the computer, and they'll just sit in silence until I can stop and turn and get off my chair and go over to them. And it's very much seen as an open door to them. I'm wondering about that whole, I think, Gabriel, you talked about people working in children's homes when they are well qualified and, you know, with huge experience. And unfortunately, our experience is the opposite. You know, I've been a manager for, you know, over nearly 30 years now. And it's, you know, we're lucky if we can get students to stay on with us and become our staff members, because we're so short-staffed at the moment. But even before the crisis, children's homes for many, many years have been seen as the last resort for alternative care. It is like the dumping ground. And there are so few of us who are doing anything alternative other than what the absolutely standards expect. So it's a risk adverse, all you like, cover your ass. No matter what you do, cover your ass. That's the most important thing. Make sure nobody says anything bad about you. So, you know, we've had this good fight. I manage a therapeutic community, and the more I'm hearing from you this morning, the more I'm saying we're very closely aligned. We're very close to practice. I'm sure our theory bases must be coming from the same sources. We've just maybe interpreted slightly differently. I don't know, but so much of it is confirming for me. So I'm delighted this morning. But it is a fight. It is an absolute fight. Every goddamn time somebody comes to my door, it's a fight to stay true to our principles, true to our ethos, and to hold these children up as being children rather than problems or a control issue. Or, you know, I'm tired now, I suppose, is the thing I'm thinking. You know, that we're constantly having to fight people who are supposed to be educated in this. You know, if we've got inspectors coming, surely to God they know their trade, and their trade should not just be ticking boxes. It should be knowing these children, really understanding them, but that seems to have been lost somewhere along the way.
I think in fairness, Helen, I think that's the wave that we're trying to catch, is that actually, do you know what? There's a whole lot of energy out there. There's lots of pockets of people doing great work, and I wouldn't be surprised if the field of social pedagogy, etc., is all across the field, because it has been spattered, as I say, in the education for a number of years.
Lillian,
so
how is it then that the whole system of this, what you call it, the theory that TUSLA are now running out of this tick the box assessment? I can't even think of the bloody name of it now.
I think that's an interesting one, but I think Gabriel is anxious to get to the next slide.
Yeah, I think we'll
have conversation, Helen. That's definitely worth exploring and pursuing. I do know there's areas in TUSLA or TUSLA areas that are interested in the training, so there may be a shift going on in there as well.
So.
Like I can definitely say there is an interest in the social pedagogy training. You know, so I'll let Gabriel get on to the next piece. If not, he's going to not have me as co-host ever again.
No, that's all fine and welcome, and I completely empathize with that sense of frustration and despair of things just going in a direction that's kind of antithetical to where we want to go. I think I recognize some of that from a UK context as well, and I know a lot of particularly children's homes, but not just, also social group teams and others who have kind of, through long struggles and hard work, kind of been able to kind of make a different argument, and felt that social pedagogy kind of articulates that in a way that enables them to then kind of say, like, yeah, but look how it works in Denmark. Or now we could say, like, look how well it's working in some of the children's homes in the UK. This is why we need this. This is how it's going to enable us to improve outcomes and to find that common ground. Because ultimately, I think all regulators want that as well. It's just that what that looks like in their mindset might be different to what you feel that should look like in practice. I think there's also one example that I just wanted to share, because we've been talking a lot about residential childcare, and I'm mindful that not all of you are sort of within that practice area. One example I really love comes from an English local authority, from a service that was supporting homeless people. And they had this one homeless man who for 30 years had been, struggling. He had committed more than 300 offenses over those 30 years and had not engaged with any of the services that they'd been provided. And we probably all recognize this. We probably all recognize that these people then are labeled as kind of hard to engage or difficult to engage, or whatever language we use to kind of just, completely ignore the diamond within them. What it took was one person who actually was interested in building a relationship with that homeless man, who was interested in his perspective. And rather than saying like, oh, you're homeless, we've got this sheltered accommodation for you. This was pre-cost of living crisis, just as a little caveat. But just instead of saying like, okay, so there's this sheltered accommodation, this is going to be good for you because you're homeless, he actually sat down with the homeless man and found out like, what are your priorities in life? What's important to you? What matters to you? And actually realized that his priority of finding shelter, having lived as a homeless person for near on 30 years, it wasn't to have a roof above his head. His priority was to get dental treatment, because that was something that was, really making his life quite miserable. And you can probably, sort of empathize with that. If you live on the streets for that long, your dental hygiene is going to have, it's not going to be great, right? So that was his priority. So what the worker did was he made sure that they put dental treatment in place. And once that was in place, it was like, what's your next priority? And the next priority was to get a bike so that he could, move around more easily in the city, move from one place to another. So the support worker was able to source a second-hand bike somewhere for him. Again, no financial cost to that. They just did it. No big kind of time investment or anything needed. It was just very much led by what is it that matters to you. Third priority for the homeless person was to get a better sleeping bag because it was starting to get cold. So again, they found one in a second-hand shop and provided that. It was only the fourth priority that the homeless person was thinking about. Okay, actually now I wouldn't mind perhaps getting somewhere to stay with a roof above my head. As a result of that exercise and really listening to what that person really needed, what his priorities were, where he was at, he stopped offending, and he started to really engage with, alcohol support treatments, that kind of stuff. He started to get the sense of hope for his future and these kinds of ideas of what he could do with the rest of his life. And all it took in the beginning was this one worker who was prepared to just sit there and listen, and it made all the difference. So I think it hopefully shows that we all individually have that kind of power to help people really change their lives, transform their lives when we're there for them, when we show that we see more than just what meets the eye, and that we're willing to find out what their perspective is. What I would like to do next is to just give you an opportunity to talk a bit more, and to put you into breakout rooms, basically to talk about this question: how does everything you've heard so far, particularly around the diamond model, connect to your practice? So remember that we're by no means wanting to suggest that this is all completely strange or very different to what you're doing. I think what we're really curious about is, like, do you recognize that model in some of the work that you're doing? And would you have examples that you might like to share with each other about that? Okay. All right, brilliant. So we have everybody back, and we have a bit of time to ask you for any examples. You might have just discussed anything from your breakout room that you would like to share with the wider group. Here's your chance. Anybody happy to get us started?
Can I just add something, if that's okay? Gabriel, conscious that I've contributed already, but yeah, it was like I just commented that the examples that you've provided for yourself and Toby they're fantastic and they're inspiring, and you know, I get them, but in my experience in practice, it doesn't happen in a linear way. Yeah, often you can use relationship-based practice really well, connect very much so with the person you're working with. There can be change, there can be progress, but often it can get very, very messy, very, very quickly. I'm particularly thinking about my experience in homeless services and working with people, you know, that are substance dependent, that there can be a step forward, should be celebrated, should be used as an example, but often then there's a number of steps back, and it does get messy. Equally, relationships, right, are very messy. So it's that piece, how we use social pedagogy or other relationship practice models to encourage the practitioner, you know, to acknowledge this can also happen, and to keep going. You know, I think that's really, really important. Sometimes we can give some kind of headline examples, and it might even put pressure on people that this is the way it should work. It should work in this linear way, particularly students or people that are just coming into practice. But often that's not the case. Often it's way more messier, as you all know, and you experience from practice. So it's just about how to navigate that little piece, I think, is worth the comment. Yeah.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I think that's where people often find this is where social pedagogy adds real strength for two reasons. One is it acknowledges that we work in complexity. Yeah, so the people we support have complex lives. The issues they're affected by are by no means trivial. They're complex. They're not just a person's individual circumstances, but it all takes place within that wider backdrop of social inequality, right? Which is messy and complex and all of that. And social pedagogy gives you that opportunity to work in a way that is that uses your own professional situational judgment. So rather than kind of saying like, oh, here's what we always do, it's more about like, it depends. Like Toby was saying earlier, it was driving him nuts to hear it depends. But it really does depend on like, who are we supporting? What's our relationship? What's our aim? What's the context within we work? And so it always needs to be an exploratory journey together. You know, we're on a journey with people. We're trying to pick them up where they are at and really understanding what's going on in their lives, what's important to them, what's kind of limiting them, and what can we do to hopefully create the conditions in which their life can improve. And that's a responsibility that I can't achieve that on my own. I can only achieve that together with others. So that's why we need to work collaboratively as well. I'd also say that one of the things about social pedagogy is that it gives us this kind of conceptual framework, that kind of ethical framework to ensure that when we're dealing with that complexity and with that mess, we're kind of really grounded in like a clear sense of purpose and the kind of ethics of what we're trying to do, so that we have that as our navigating principles, basically. And it gives us that shared language that we can use across different professional groups. So that, you know, one of the great things is always when I speak to social workers and they go like, yeah, I can totally relate to that. It really fits with what I'm trying to do, why I went into social work. I speak to social care workers. When I speak to educators or teachers in schools, they can all see that within their practice. So hopefully it can create this, broader picture of like, we're using a shared language and we're all doing different things, working towards the same overarching goal, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's by no means easy and it's by no means linear, because in complexity, things happen, and it's all about that kind of emergence of like, let's move forward and see where we're at, what feels like the right step or the right direction now, and that will change as we move forward. There's a whole lot more that I could say to that, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. And I know, Lisa, you had unmuted yourself as well to contribute, I think.
Yeah, I think kind of nearly following on from John, our conversation was talking about sometimes the boundaries that can be blurred when you're building relationships with individuals that are supported. And I'm basing mine on thinking about people with intellectual disabilities, that for some people, the only opportunity they have to build relationships is with the staff. And it's the time that they learn how to role model. But sometimes then there can be a lot of confusion around the professional relationship, and it blurs into a friendship that isn't really a true friendship. And when you'd talked in the diamond model about the authentic relationship, and we're not really then supporting people to build authentic relationships because there's that blurring of the professional role. So I think I'm just really interested if you've any thoughts on that.
Yes, we'll come to that in just a little while, because
Okay.
I'd like to introduce you to a model that kind of tries to help us with ensuring that we don't get too muddled up in that blurring. So if you bear with us a little longer, I'll come to that. Toby, I wonder if I can just bring you in there as well.
Yeah. So you'd asked for sort of in examples, and obviously we've got far too many, but this is the one I was sort of most proud of. And I think Lillian, you said earlier, sort of there aren't any accidents. Everything happens on purpose, but certainly an accident that we had was that there's a scene in one of the early Pirates of the Caribbean movies where Keira Knightley calls on the pirate code to have a parley with Geoffrey Rush, and that basically means that they can talk without killing each other. And at the end of their parley, Geoffrey Rush kidnaps her, and she said, "But what about the pirate code?" And his response was, "It's they're less rules, more like guidelines." And we adopted that as a sort of mantra that we had, and I wasn't really quite sure why we were adopting it, but we did. And in one of the houses, we put up a whiteboard, and one of the first things that went up on the whiteboard, which I then took a photograph of, which I was really proud of, is this.
I'll just spotlight it so that we can see this. Yeah. You're just covering the microphone whilst you're showing us this. Yeah. There are no rules. It is not a problem unless it's a problem.
And then 4, 5, and 6, in terms of the list of rules, were left blank. And again, come back to Lillian's idea, the no accents. The genius of this, which we didn't really understand at the time, was that actually there was less of a sort of, well, you're not allowed to do that because it says here in Rule 5 of our Code of Conduct that you can't smoke in your bedroom, for example. It means that everything is a discussion. And actually you're forced into a relationship when there is a clear violation of essentially what should be an accepted rule. You don't smoke in the house, sort of stuff. But actually you have to have a conversation, and you have the conversation with the kid about why it's an issue, and actually what do we want to try and do to address this particular issue. And I suppose what these concepts brought us into is, instead of greeting a child with a list of prohibitions, they say, look, what am I allowed to do? Well, I don't know. What do you want to do? It's not a problem unless it's a problem, So, lying around in bed all day, yeah, look, there's no rule against that, but actually it might be a problem. You know, let's talk about it. You know, how is this working for you lying around in bed all day? Is it not? How do we get that need met? And I think, again, it was something that this, you know, that the pedagogues introduced us to this idea, because we wanted to sit down and write all the rules and introduce the kids with the rules. It's, look, don't have any rules, because it depends. You know, every rule essentially is there to be broken, you know, and if it is to be broken, there needs to be a discussion as to why and how and what does it mean for everyone that we're breaking this. And I think it's been, for me, I think, a really useful part of what we've introduced. Is that fair to say?
That sounds great. It reminds me of a Danish children's home that we were visiting, and they were talking about they don't have rules, they have norms, and norms are there for everybody. So it's not something that just applies to the children, young people. It applies to everybody. And one of the norms was like, when you go into the house, you take off your shoes and you put on a pair of slippers. Everybody did that. They even required the inspector to do that, because that was their norm, that was their culture, that was something that was important to them. And they were very good at articulating why that was important, what it did from an educational perspective. So it comes back to that bit about when we have rules that are written somewhere, then we just refer to those rules and everything becomes like, yeah, because the rules tell us, as opposed to we have an internal, clearly delineated or clear sense of like, why is it that we want everybody to wear slippers, or why is it that we sit down and have meals together, or yeah, why is it that we're encouraging each other to get up in the morning, or go to school, or those kinds of things. So it's not to say like that anything goes, but it's about how do we do that together collaboratively, in ways that are respectful and move us forward. Great. Any more examples from your breakout room conversations? Anything that this would?
Yeah, if Helen doesn't mind, I might build on the conversation we were having, which was, and it fits nicely, I think, after Toby's example there of rules, and that's the admission process that we have in Compass, and Helen's was the very same, whereby I think at the core is that any young person that we admit into the centre, they have to choose to come to live with us. And that, I think, sets a stall from the very start. So what does that look like? You're not telling someone that this is where you're going to live, this is what happens here, this is the rules, even this is the norms. The conversation is, this is who we are, this is the home, this is where it is. Let's find out a little bit more about you. Could you see yourself living here? What would be the difficulties for you to live here? And try and make it something that they can actually make a decision on in their own head, rather than what we came to know in residential care, this settling in period at the start where kids would come in kicking and screaming and fighting because they're put somewhere where they don't want to be. So at the very core of that is to flip that on its head and work with a young person and say, do you actually want to live here? This is what we have to offer. And really importantly, if not, genuinely if not, this has happened, particularly with kids maybe who grew up in real urban areas, Dublin City, coming down to the southwest of the country to rural environment, it just might not work for them. They don't want to be there. So let's acknowledge that, and let's advocate for that young person at the very early stage and say, look, this actually isn't going to work for them or us. So I think, Helen, we had a really good conversation where that's her ethos and core value is the very, very same. So if you want to build on that, Helen, please do.
Yeah, our last young person in was 10 when he was coming to us, and the social worker had, you know, he had broken down another placement. He had come out of a long-term foster placement. It looked like that was never going to be, you know, the rupture was never going to be repaired. He went into residential, he ran away, he split up a team, and eventually he arrived at our door, and it was a case of, you know, I had to tell the social worker, I'm going to give him a choice. And she was petrified because she didn't have another service to offer him. So she was kind of like, well, what am I going to do with him if you don't take him in? And I said, well, if I take him in, he's going to run away unless he chooses to stay. So you're going to have another problem on your hand anyway. So it was a case of, I was being really, really explicit with them as to who we are. I said, look, I'm going to put out my stall for the next 2 weeks. You're going to have a look at every bit of us. You can ask me all the questions you want. And at the end of it, I said, you and I will sit down and we'll talk throughout the 2 weeks that you can come and look and visit us and stay with us for a while. And he was very clear, like in the beginning, you know, I'm going to come and wreck the place. I'm going to come and I'm going to run away, and I'm going to come and you're going to hate me and I'm going to hate you and all that. And I went, okay, well, let's see. I said, you know, there's very few kids I've ever really hated now, in fairness. So, you know, let's see. You're going to test me on that one. And he goes, yeah, I am. He said. I went, okay, right. So the conversation, you know, was very clear about, you're not coming here just to mark time. Children that I take in, I don't take bold children into my house. I take children who are in pain. I take children who are very sad, who are very hurt, but I don't take bold children. So look around you. There aren't no bold kids in this house, and I'm inviting you to come because I don't think you're a bold child either. But I do think a lot of things have happened to you that have made you very sad. And all throughout this conversation that went on for 2 weeks, his social worker was absolutely terrified. She badmouthed me everywhere. She didn't understand. And eventually I said to her, on such and such a date, I said to the young boy, you and I will sit down and you will give me your answer. But don't give me your answer until that date. Think about it. And I had to give him a time and a date that we would sit down. And by God, did I have to be in that room at that moment, you know, exactly 2:30 on the Thursday evening, whatever. And I said, have you, you know, made your decision? Have you thought about it? Are there any more questions you want to ask me? And he said, how long do you think I'd need to stay here for? And I said, gosh, I said, broken hearts, you know, when people's hearts are broken, it didn't happen overnight. So probably, you know, it took quite a while. And he said, yeah, I've been thinking about that too. He says, I reckon about 2 years, maybe. And I went, yeah, do you know what? I think you're right. I said, I think you've nailed it there. I said, are you thinking that you'd like to stay with us? And he goes, yeah, I think this is probably about the best place. And I picked up the phone to a social worker and I said, he's made his decision. He's also had a timeline that he thinks would be suitable. And I think he's right. And she just could not believe it, could not believe that the child made the decision and that he came and that we took the risk. And she'd no choice but to take the risk with us because I, you know, said it, but that is not what social workers are used to. And in fairness to the child, I said, if you choose not to come here, it's not that you can go home. It's not that you go off into Disneyland or somewhere like that. Your social worker will have to look for somewhere else for you. So it's not that you're going to get something else, but I'm offering you a choice about us. And that's all I can do is offer you a choice about us. I can't say what the other choices will be that you will be offered. And just being real and honest and talking about why he's coming as opposed to pretending something, you know, something has happened to him and it is awful and it's not going to go away. And it's working. He was a very violent child and I think he's with us, he'll be with us 10 months and we've had 9 SENs. You know, and not for want of massive effort, let me tell you, on part of the social care workers, you know, to regulate him and regulate him and regulate him all the time. But he's very clear that he made the decision. And it's worked. It's working. It's working at the moment. So
thanks. That's a beautiful example. I love it. And it just very much shows that power of when we take people seriously and when we're actually asking for them to, you know, give themselves a chance, really. Right?
Yeah.
Love it. Thanks. Have we any more examples that anybody would like to share? Or any other reflections?
Hi, Gabriel. This is Ali here. Nice to see you, Lillian.
Hi, Ali. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. It's been too long.
Good to see you. Yeah, there's some nice people that I have. Delighted to see you again. It's great.
Good to see you. I suppose I've quite a nice little example from the homeless service. I suppose the diamond model, without realizing it. We had an elderly gentleman, which, you know, usually they're the younger demographic, like come into the homeless service. So he's about 67 and he'd really lost his mojo. He was finding the hostel like a very harsh environment, as you can imagine. You know, he got a bit depressed, kind of had nothing to occupy his days. So like, you know, every day seemed like about 10 put into one. So I suppose creativity and showing your own vulnerability within that relationship is very important. So I decided to do a bit of life story work with him. So we looked back on his life, and I suppose looking for those diamonds that made him sparkle. So then we find out that he loved ballroom dancing, etc., etc., etc. About 3 or 4 things that he really loved. So we got him out to all these things, got him enrolled in classes, and then suddenly he was away from the hostel a lot of the time, so he didn't find it so, you know, such a hard place to endure. And then eventually he got the house, just nearly like your example, Gabriel, before. But just by searching, you know, back across his life for things that really gave him great joy, and as a social care worker, you know, really bringing that back into his life, you know, made his life complete. And he got his own little place then. He was still continuing the classes, and he was a very happy chappy at 67 again. So life had kind of reinvented for him, you know. So look, I suppose that's an example of the diamond model, really, without knowing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's the beauty of the diamond model, in that people kind of often recognize, oh, this is what I actually did, and hopefully it gives you greater value of just how transformative that will have been for him. And I think also there's something in there about it's never too late to help people turn their lives around, or, you know, to kind of really invest in those relationships. And of course, it's a thing that keeps us going in practice, right? When we're dealing with the mess and the complexity and the kind of restrictions that we perceive in the system, and the limitations that are there, the things that keep people going over years and decades are those kinds of experiences of like, despite all of that, we've kind of helped somebody make a real difference. And so I think hopefully social pedagogy can kind of help shift that focus back to that, because it's the thing that keeps people motivated and keeps them in those jobs, and hopefully keeps them or prevents them from experiencing that kind of moral burnout or physical burnout as well. So thanks for sharing that. There's also one example that just came to mind as you were talking, and this is from a care home where they decided to set up a choir that both the people in the care home, as well as their family members, as well as staff, could join. And they just had this choir that it comes back to this bit about like, how can we create situations where we can all be human beings, where we can be equal to each other, where we're no longer staff versus residents versus their families, but where we kind of dissolve some of that through an activity that we all enjoy. And the beauty of that was that people could be in the choir for as long as they wanted to, and particularly family members who might have just lost a person who was staying in the care homes weren't just told like, oh, sorry, now that your dad is no longer with us, we'll ask you to leave the choir. But it continued to be a forum that everybody could just participate in. And so it's about these kinds of things that I think, depending on the practice context, may or may not be possible, but it's about just looking for these opportunities to just create situations where we can just be human with each other, and, you know, follow our interests, follow our passions, to kind of really create that sense of we, so that we're kind of dissolving this idea of us versus them, and don't focus on what makes us different, but actually in what ways are we similar, and how can we use those connections. So that leads us into this idea of the 3 Ps, which often kind of helps people when they come across social pedagogy. So the 3 Ps basically is a Danish model, and it talks about this idea of the professional, the personal, and the private self. Okay, so what I'd like you to do before I actually start sharing this is in the chat, I would like you to put something professional. Okay, so that could be something that's important to you as a professional. So that might be punctuality or compassion or being reliable or yeah, whatever it might be. Okay, so just put in one quality that as a professional, this is important to you. Okay, flexibility, yeah, that's great. There's no right or wrong answer, by the way, and you can copy other people as well. This is not cheating. Empathy, reliability, being reflective, yeah, perfect. Integrity, kindness, trust, yeah, perfect. So keep those going. Being approachable, openness, reliable, boundaries, yeah. Perfect. Now what I would like you to put in the chat is something personal. Okay, so that is just something that you'd be happy to share within the context of this group. Okay, obviously we're not going to include the chat in the recording or anything, so feel free to put in something you might enjoy sharing with everybody here. So that could be a hobby that you might have, could be I have 2 kids, I live in Greystones, I enjoy this, that, the other, whatever it might be. Yeah, right. And I won't read out the things that you put in just because of the recording, but yeah, you can see that people are mentioning some of the hobbies, some of the activities that they enjoy doing. Yeah, so these are some of the things that make you who you are. They're all really lovely things. Perfect, great. So now, last but not least, what I'd like you to do is think of something private to you, something that you wouldn't share with others, that might not be relevant for this particular session, or that you wouldn't share with anybody you've only just met. Do not put that thing in the chat, but when you found something, put an X in the chat. Okay, just to mark that you have thought of something. Okay, but keep that to yourself. Okay, perfect. And hopefully that is starting to kind of intuitively give you a sense of where we might draw the line between the professional, the personal, and the private. So we'll come to that just now as you're all kind of putting your X's there. So the professional self is basically this idea that as professional social care workers or as professional social pedagogues or whatever your professional background is, you obviously have a specific role, you have specific knowledge, you have that kind of expertise that's relevant for your practice. You understand the kind of theory that might be relevant, you have insight into the kind of legal, ethical, and professional frameworks. You have a lot of interpersonal and methodological and reflective skills and all of that. Yeah, the kind of stuff that enables you to do your job exceptionally well. Okay, so that's the professional self. We've talked a fair bit about the importance of authentic relationships, and that it's not just a job for want of a better way of putting it. It's actually also about who we are, what we bring into that. And so instead of saying like we can either be professional or personal, actually what the 3 Ps encourages us to do is to say we can actually be both. The important bit is that we're actually not just professional, but that we also bring our personal self into our practice, because it enables us to be authentic, to meaningfully relate to the people we support, to be more than just somebody with the right kind of lanyard and the right set of keys or access codes, swipe cards or whatever to get access to places. we're much more than that. We're human beings with our own values, with our own life experiences, with our own interests and personal qualities. And when we're actually able to bring those in, that's great, because it increases the quality of support that we can offer. It really deepens those kind of human-to-human relationships that we can build, and that make all the difference. And we know that that makes all the difference, right? The thing is, what we don't want to bring in is the private self. And this is where we need to draw that boundary about like what is personal and what can we bring in, because it's about who we are. It brings in our relational self, basically. And what are the things, the experiences that I might have made that are irrelevant for practice, or the kind of interests and experiences, life aspects that I wouldn't share with just anybody, that I would share with my close family, my close friends, but that I would otherwise try and keep out of practice, okay? That includes perhaps experiences that might just be too raw, too unprocessed for me to meaningfully bring into practice. So that might be, you know, sort of experiences of bereavement, or experiences of being in care myself, or experiences of supporting somebody who I'm a carer for, or these kinds of things. For sometimes some of these are just too raw, too unprocessed. So if I were to bring them in, I would probably end up being the one that needs support, in which case I need to try and keep them out of practice. But actually, some experiences that I have and that I've been able to process can enable me to build more empathic connections with other people, can enable me to, in those situations, help somebody understand that they're not alone in the world. To give you an example, I was talking to a social worker who had a student who was on a placement, and she'd been told to do a placement visit to a boy, a teenage boy. And she was told that, like, you know, there were several dozen social workers who had tried to get anything out of him, and he wasn't going to engage with her. But, you know, somebody had to go visit him. So it was her job now as a student social worker to try and do that. So she went, and of course, you know, he wouldn't open his bedroom door. So instead of just saying like, okay, I'll just go off again, she decided to stay there, and you know, she started to play music on her phone, and she kind of had a bit of an understanding of what music he was into, and she happened to be into the same kind of music as him. So basically, as she was playing the music, she was starting to kind of just chat away with him about music, and why she loved this particular band, and what band he enjoyed listening to. And initially that didn't really, you know, gain any response, but she kept going back, and she kept trying that. And after a couple of visits, he actually started to respond. He wouldn't open his bedroom door or anything, but he started to talk to her, and talked about his music taste in the beginning. But as their relationship kind of developed, and probably because the door was closed, he felt able to disclose to her that he really struggled with his sexual identity, and that he didn't know how to articulate that to his parents and how to come out. And that was just a great worry for him. And in that moment, in that particular situation, she felt able to talk to him about her experience of coming out, because she happened to be gay as well. And so in that moment, she felt like actually this own life experience is hopefully going to help me build that, deepen that relationship, and is hopefully going to help him kind of understand that he's not the only one in the world that has to go through this. It's not to say that her strategies might necessarily help him, but actually it helped him kind of build a connection to someone he felt could really understand, deeply understand what he was going through, because she had gone through something similar in her life. And so in that situation, it kind of came back to it made sense to her, and she chose that instead of keeping that private as she normally did, that in that particular situation, because of the wider purpose of trying to support him, trying to build a meaningful relationship, trying to help him figure out how to move forward with that particular issue, that it felt like the right thing to do, to bring that into the personal self. And again, the professional self kind of effectively framed that decision of like, is this about me and my need to be liked, or is this about that young person and his needs? And so it can be a really helpful model, I think, because it makes us reflect on like what's going on for us and what are we bringing into that relationship, and to make that decision. And again, it comes back to, in different situations with different people, we might have to make different decisions. And actually that's okay, as long as we're able to articulate why we might make that decision. And as long as we're clear about like, where are those boundaries for us right here and right now? The thing about this model is also that sometimes, or perhaps quite often, we need the help. We need to be able to kind of be able to draw on our colleagues, to draw on our manager, to help us figure out where those boundaries are, and to make sure that we're okay with what we do bring into our practice, into that personal, what we make personal and bring into practice, and what we might need to keep private. So it needs that kind of reflective space as well with colleagues or within supervision to just help figure that out. And it's by no means to say like we always get it right or anything, but actually it enables us to get it more right than wrong at Archie. So I'm gonna just stop the screen share there and wonder whether Derek, Toby, Claire, do you guys have any kind of examples that might connect to the 3Ps? I know you guys use it quite a lot as well. Derek.
Yeah. Compass has kind of evolved in the 10 years we've been in operation. So we have different services. And I think in each different service, each individual, I suppose, within those services, but definitely each distinct service uses the 3Ps quite differently. So we have a live-in model of care where we have primarily 3 house pedagogues, we call them, that live and share their life space with young people. So in this context, if you think of exercising together, bedtime routines, pajamas, showering, maybe getting news from your own family that you mightn't have predicted within that environment, having to deal with that, maybe having to take space for yourself, maybe feeling unwell. And in the traditional setting, depending on how unwell you feel, you might go home, whereas in this setting, they might stay in that setting and just be sick. And maybe the kids care for the adults a little bit or understand certainly that they can get sick and this is what happens. So a reflective tool that we use is looking at the 3, the personal, the private, and the professional, and we ask our pedagogues to maybe put a percentage on each one of them, where or how much they utilize each one. So for an example, I suppose, what we find an awful lot is the personal becomes a very big circle in these settings, a really, really big circle. The professional starts to get smaller and smaller as time goes on. The personal gets bigger and bigger, and also the private, depending on the setting. There is very different settings. There's that live-in model of care versus an aftercare service that we run, where the private would probably be far bigger. But yeah, I think using that reflection tool and having people being really aware of where they are themselves in terms of their 3Ps is really, really important and really interesting. It allows people to explore that a little bit. It allows people to explore certainly what their private is. And you talked about having something processed. I think that's really important. Something like a death in the family that we might be aware of, to be able to speak about that openly in a supervision or reflective process to support when they're working directly with young people, and how to gauge and manage that. So yeah, that's would be our experience to date, is that personal self really gets brought to the table, and that circle is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So people's core values, their interests, their family background, how they were, this is what really comes to the fore in terms of the relational practice. Of course, it's maybe guided by somewhat in terms of theory and their educational background and so on and so forth. And there's the private pieces that people need to be aware of. But definitely that inner circle, that personal piece becomes really, really, really large, I think, over time.
Yeah, thanks. Toby, Claire, any examples from you?
I suppose a sort of fairly simple example is having our kids come to some of our in-house and external training. So, for example, first aid. We might have a kid who has interest in first aid, ultimately becoming paramedic, come and do the training alongside the adults. And it's an interesting experience for both the adults and the kids, because the adults can sometimes feel sort of quite vulnerable in terms of not being experts and sort of struggling with something. The kid gets to see them in that situation, similar to what Derek said about somebody being sick, and help chip in and say, well, look, if you do it this way, this is how you can get it to work, in terms of whatever the practical bits they're doing as part of first aid. And so the child gets an experience of seeing adults in a completely different frame, feels part of it, and shares, in the moment, both the professional and the personal part of the adult or the adults that they're doing the training with.
That's a lovely common third exercise as well, because, as you're saying, you are all learning together, because there's nobody an expert in the room except the trainer. So, you're on that equal footing with the child, which is a really nice space to be in, because it's hard to find those opportunities where you are in that space with the kids, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it dissolves that bit about, professional expertise, and actually engaging, as a learner, rather than somebody who already knows all the answers, or who feels pressured to just constantly have, all the knowledge available.
It's a brilliant example, Toby. We have a child who attended a 2-day social pedagogy training with us. And yeah, so if you can imagine you trying to understand social pedagogy, how to apply it in practice, and then you have a young person in the room with you who's maybe looking at you and questioning it, particularly people who work directly with that girl. But she was just brilliant. Talk about getting out of your comfort zone, I think, and into a real either learning zone or panic zone for a lot of people. Yeah, can I talk freely with this young person there? Am I going to offend her? How is she going to take up on this? And what actually came from that was she was great. She gave us more examples, and she gave us a bigger pat in the back than we could ever give ourselves, I think. And rather than bash two-slit for 2 days, we really talked about examples and what makes a real difference for this child on a day-to-day level. She's actually now, she's a youth ambassador for the SPDN. She spoke, she's 16. She spoke at a conference virtually in London last year, and she's currently in Denmark with 2 of her carers, and she's just visiting other pedagogical services in Denmark to see how they do things there and meet other children in residential care. As kind of an exploratory experience as part of her role as youth ambassador. So
that's great.
Yeah, that all came from attending the training and being brave enough to allow the child to attend that training.
Yeah, that's fabulous, Derek. My God.
Gabriel, like from the education point of view, these 3 Ps are really difficult to teach. The concept, yes, it's like, you can delineate them up and you can make your package, if you like. But the tricky bit, I think, for me, I don't know, I know there's other educators on the platform as well, is where there is that private space. Because if you shut down that private space altogether, say you cannot talk about whatever is private in your life in this space, how do we teach somebody to maintain the boundaries in practice, one, but also how do you help somebody process some of the gunk that's in there that needs to be processed? So for me, that if I have to think about all of the tasks that I do as an educator, it is that one task that I would say is the trickiest and most prickly, because if we don't manage it properly, you have people who will take out their private stuff and shove it into their personal, and they are shared it all over the place for their agenda. You know, Pam Travistack always talks about when you share your very private parts of your life, is it for you to feel better, or is it to help your service user, your client, your family, your community actually understand other people have done this, and actually there are ways through, not necessarily giving people a path to follow, but actually the hope that there's light at the end of this tunnel. So for me, that's the biggest. When I try to start with these 3 Ps, and probably struggle with them with people across the 4 years and plus. Because I feel quite privileged. Like a lot of graduates would still tap in and out, like, you know, even they'd be struggling in work and they'd say, Lillian, I need to talk to somebody outside. Do you have half an hour somewhere? Do you know? So relationship works in all of the contexts, in any and in the education context, but it's trying to help people process while develop this as a working strategy for their own lives, but also for work as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the 3 Ps can be really, really helpful in facilitating those reflections, you know, with students or with, you know, colleagues or people that you're responsible for, so that they gradually become better at differentiating, like, what is it that I can bring into my professional practice, and what is it that I really need to be mindful of that could be a trigger for me, and what might I need to do to process that. But ultimately, that choice needs to be every person's. Like, where I draw the line needs to be my choice. So I can benefit from everybody else's insight, but ultimately, like, if I don't get it, if I don't think it's a problem, if I don't notice my own triggers, then I will continue to struggle until I kind of, get that insight somewhere. Helen.
This is a very interesting thing, because on one level, when we moved from a generic base of of care to this very more focused TC, the one thing I said to my boss at the time was we weren't going to go public until every staff member felt comfortable with the theory and the professional knowledge and skills. So it took us about 5 years before I decided we could tell everybody. And that was about getting the personal and the professional for people to feel comfortable in their own skin, to own their practice. They have to be very comfortable. They have to know what the practice is about, understand the theory and the framework. But they also have to know where their own experience and their own skills fit in there. And so there was always that balance. And then, because we're a TC, one of the lovely ideas is to have people come back and work with you that have lived in a TC. And I've had 4 people now on my team who have lived in TCs or lived in children's homes, not necessarily TCs because there's so few of us around. But they've lived in children's homes and they've come back and worked. And that private piece is always the bit that I'm looking at in supervision. What's useful for the child? You know, there's some of the stuff is still very raw for them. We're very triggering because, you know, they're working alongside us now. And we could be saying things in the staff room that they kind of think, Jesus, you were saying that about me when I was a kid. When staff are offloading, when staff are venting. And I'm always conscious there's, you know, this young woman, this young man was once upon a time a child who was spoken about possibly like this. So it has, one, put manners on us. If nothing else, that's for sure. It's put manners on us in the staff room. And I love that. I love that when we now vent, it's real venting. It's not just this offload of disgusting bile that can come out sometimes, but it's much more reflective. That we also, because we're the TC, we have a process group where, you know, raw processing around the dynamics between the staff, which is private and personal and professional, gets discussed in a very safe space. And as the manager, I supervise all my staff team, whereas I know in lots of other places, social care leaders are taking on peer supervision. And that's an awful lot for people to take on and then go back on the floor and work with the children. So I've continually fought my boss about not handing over supervision to anybody else, because one, I'm qualified and I've got X amount of years. And I don't expect my staff team to be qualified, because they're not trained in supervision and clinical supervision, and they also have to work with the children for 24 hours alongside their colleague who they've just supervised. So to me, it just doesn't work in my head. But the private stuff can stay private in the supervision session with me. And when I know that I'm not able for that, when I know it has to go somewhere else, I'm able to tell them, you need to bring this somewhere else. This is outside my realm of expertise now. You need to go. Whereas I don't believe their colleague should be saying that to them. Or could say it. They might just want to hear it because it might be gossipy. It might be something they'd have over them. I don't know. You don't know what people will interpret that as. But having young people grow up in care and then come back and work with you is a real eye opener. It terms, you know, does put manners on you, for want of a better word. It makes you so much more conscientious of all those P's and how you can go from professional to personal. Also, I suppose I have longevity on my team. I have people working with me, like my core group are there 20 years, and children that are now grown up coming back and having other types of relationships and introducing their children to us as this is the woman. I met a young man in the shopping centre last week, and he introduced me to his girlfriend, and he says, this is the woman I told you about. She reared me. You know, and you're kind of going, oh my God. So, you know, you cross over that line, but you have to be really comfortable in your own skin to do that. And you have to know that the child is at the centre all the time, even if they're 30 odd. It's still the child at the centre. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said there in terms of creating that safe space for people to kind of really deeply reflect on some of that private stuff. And of course, we also know this from, you know, other services, for instance, supporting people with drug and substance misuse issues. A lot of the practitioners there might have own experience of going through this, or people supporting people in mental health crisis or with domestic violence issues and all of that. So, you know, having a model like the 3 Ps can really kind of help people feel able to bring the personal and professional into that relationship with the people they support, and to feel secure that they can keep their private out of that because they have others within their team. They have a culture that enables them to ensure that they're okay at the end of the day as well at a private level. Okay, Lillian, I'm very mindful that we've got about 10 minutes left now before
that's okay.
we go, and we wanted to share a little bit more about your perspective in particular, and like what does social pedagogy add as a perspective?
Yeah, I suppose I suppose one of the things that I think that the crossover, if you like, or where the alignment between social pedagogy and social care is that I suppose it's around the capabilities that service users and people who require our assistance have, and that in general, I think workers want to harness that potential that these people have. You know, and to kind of move that on, we do know that the system is a little bit tighter than what we like, but that we will fight that battle, as, you know, Helen was saying, you know, like we are the warriors in that. I think the other thing that social pedagogy gives is it's based in participation. That we are participating in another person's life, and another person is participating in the service that we are giving them. And that from all of the examples that people are talking about here it's the dialogue, it's the conversation, it's picking up on the narrative. And, you know, like I was talking about the social script there, that has been set up for people. And like that goes on for non-care requiring children as well. You know, I see some very damaging situations, even when I'm out grocery shopping. I try to do it at 8 o'clock in the morning when there's nobody there, because I can't listen to it in the afternoon. It actually pains me. I can feel it in my heart when I hear some of the talk that people get, because it's the script that's being handed to them. Go live to that and off with you. Get out of my face. So yeah, so I think social pedagogy, as we get more familiar with it, I think we will learn, and that's we can harness that dialogue, and we cannot be afraid of it. Like I suppose from where I stand and listen to the like of experts that are here and other people that I've been speaking to, there is a coherence about the model that I probably don't have at the moment, because I kind of, you know, like I dip in and I dip out and it's there, but I don't have the cohesion that Gabriel and the others have. But I see from, you know, when I'm talking to people from the UK and from other countries in Europe, that they have an integrated approach, and they've built it in, like what some of you have been talking about as well, you know, building it into the system, into the values that people hold, into the ways of practice. You know, so and again, I think, you know, the difficulty, Helen, that you were talking about then, about like what about the system that's governed us? You know, I think it will come in there, but it actually is probably a grassroots upward flow, because they're very concerned about all of the very negative scandals and stuff that we see happening. So I can see where they're coming from, a tight ship and not tight enough in places, as we've seen in the last couple of days. But also one of the big things, I suppose, is that social care claims itself to be social justice minded. Now, I know that I have a big debate about, is this caring control that we're doing, or is this care so a person can control their own life? And that's my internal debate. But we do have an ideal of social justice to help people who have been placed or pushed out or positioned on the margins and excluded from some social opportunities and life chances and qualities of life, to come in and to enter the world of the core, if you like. It's really interesting over time. I've had to sit with this a lot, you know, because I think this, you know, from my own biography, I think this is a thing that I have always been aware of being on the side, you know, and it's, if we want people to come into the core, the people that's in there has to share the resources and have to be comfortable with that. Do you know, like if, so I think for the social pedagogy element, I think it's giving me a better way about looking at, why are people not opening up? Why are they so concerned about, you know, shutting down opportunities for those who don't have it by no virtue of their own sometimes? So yeah, so for me, it kind of helps reduce that immediacy a little bit, like Helen, what you were kind of talking about, you know, like when that dump happens, it's because my internal values have been rattled so hard, I can't control them, I can't regulate. As opposed to when I can talk objectively about maybe the concerns I have for people and why the worry I have sometimes about, well, why are we treating others like that? It's I can do it at an empathetic, intellectual level rather than a dislodged emotional level. So I think it gives us that. And I think at the ultimate end, I think what social pedagogy and the huge benefit it has for social care is actually, Paul, that idea of we have a set of values that we live by. And that we enact and that we move forward in. So, which is not easy, and that's why we're all struggling, I suppose, at times. And sometimes we're delighted with the work, and other times we go, "Oh, that wasn't great, but it was the best I could do at the time." But it's kind of it's keeping moving it on. So I think at my space in my career, I think it is that actually has brought me to the place about maybe we need to be looking at social pedagogy as a key way of moving forward, but because we're all going to be caught with the regulation around social care work, it is more like an add-on, you know, like another set of skills. So that's where I would be coming from. And for that reason, I suppose we got to the place, myself and Gabriel got to the place about developing this special purpose award in social pedagogy. So we did, and it's relationship based, it's relationship centered practice from a social pedagogy point of view. You can pop that. Thanks, Gabriel. So really what it is to do is it's to get people to be introduced to what social pedagogy is and what its possibilities could be for social care, community work, youth work, and for educational practice, be that preschool, primary school, secondary school, or what some of us do in higher education, and not just, I think, with people of the caring professions. So there is quite an emphasis. We've worked hard, actually, and I have to really commend Gabriel on this. We've worked hard about keeping it very focused to core principles and kind of leaving an opportunity to grow this into something more academically robust, if you like. So what we have done is we have a 12 session block. It's 3 hours per session. We are aiming very strongly to have it online, because I know there's people here from all across the country, and getting to Wexford campus every week on a Wednesday at 12 o'clock or something isn't going to happen great. So we're pushing really for an online, or maybe you know, a first session in person and a last session to bookend it. But we're not 100% sure yet. The cost is €390 per person, and we need 15 participants to run with it. The assessment is all CA. Gabriel and myself were quite adamant about that there is a, inverted commas, theory, you know, assignment about what you're understanding, so that you get your, so that I suppose Gabriel is going to be running the module, that he gets a good understanding that everybody knows what these theoretical principles are, and then the other assessments are all about how do you use it in practice, of what use is this in practice. So they're not particularly erroneous, but they are strong enough, I think, for us to, one, know that people have the baseline knowledge, which is important, but also that this can be a framework that people can think about using. The application process is online, and what I am going to pop in there oh wait, no, it's not going to go. What I'm popping in there is, because of GDPR, yes, we've had more people sign up to this talk than actually is here, and we've some people that are here that didn't sign up. So what I'm going to ask people is that if you could follow that link and fill up that form if you're interested in getting more information around the social pedagogy cert. We're still finalising in the background with SETU around the nuts and bolts of it. As you can imagine, that's a space that everybody who has worked in any operational piece to be in. So we will welcome applications by individuals, or if there's any organisations who would be interested in, you know, an in-house delivery of, you know, to present this to a staff team or whatever, even in, you know, smaller renditions, not necessarily the full cert. That's something that myself and Gabriel will be open to as well. So yeah, because I suppose for me, I just would like to get to the space of people who need the help, get the help, so they can have the lives that they want to have and they basically deserve, and not entitled as in that awful entitled to, but that they are entitled as human beings of this earth to get in there. So that's my little piece about it. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I've definitely enjoyed listening to people, and I see Gabriel has popped in there to the chat to ask you about what's one thing that resonated with you from today's session. So if you could fill that in. Yeah.
Feel free to just add that now. Whilst we of course would love for you to do the SETU module, because you'll also get certification for it.
Mm.
If you're not quite sure just yet about social pedagogy, there's a lot of learning material that's already out there. A fair bit of which is free to access as well. So I'll send that through to everybody on the back of the session, together with all the slides. And basically, as Lillian said, if you have any questions, any interest in further exploring social pedagogy or any of the stuff we've covered today, feel free to get in touch with us. I'll also include Toby and Derek's email addresses as well, because I'm sure they'd be happy to hear from people too. So, and so finally, thanks particularly to Toby and Claire and Derek for joining us and for sharing their insight and expertise. And thank you all for joining us today and contributing so actively to this conversation. And I'm really excited about further exploring how social pedagogy can kind of fit and hopefully further strengthen social care in Ireland. So thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Gabriel.
And have a
Enjoy
lovely
the day, everybody, and thanks for being here.